Well, welcome to everyone here in person who's watching online. We're here to celebrate Women's History Month. My name is Brittany Cooper. I'm the Executive Director of Nebraskans for Peace and Vice Chair of the Nebraska Sierra Club. I'm incredibly honored to be beginning our evening tonight. This event has been years in the making for those of you that don't know. The pandemic got in our way, but we're here now gathering in these new ways, both in person and virtual. So thanks for being here tonight. We're joined by, well, 4 amazing women here at the Nebraska History Museum. These 4 women have already made history in our state. Collectively, they've stopped a dangerous pipeline, written many best-selling books, started amazing nonprofits to protect our natural resources, authored the Lincoln Climate Action Plan, and introduced legislation to establish a state climate action plan. Yay! Tonight is to highlight the amazing work women are doing nationally and in Nebraska to combat climate change and fight for environmental justice. So thank you for being here in person and online and participating in our event. I'd like to thank the organizations and businesses who supported our event tonight: Nebraskans for Peace, the Nebraska Sierra Club, Nebraska Interfaith Power and Light, Hillary at Elite Event Rentals, Mike at Red Rebel Media, and the Nebraska History Museum. I also want to thank my partners in planning the event, Ken Winston and Melissa Baker. Thank you guys. Woo! Now, let me introduce you to our esteemed moderator, Patty Pansing Brooks. Yeah. Patty has a long record of personal and professional accomplishments and community service. She was first elected to the Nebraska legislature in 2014 and has served as a Nebraska state senator until 2022. During her tenure in the legislature, she brought a bill to establish a state climate action plan for 5 years in a row. Patty also served as co-chair of the legislative committee that investigated the damage of the bomb cyclone that caused historic flooding in Nebraska in 2019. Most recently, Patty ran for Congress in Nebraska's 1st Congressional District. Welcome, Patty.
I'm so excited to be here with these brilliant, amazing, historic, fabulous women. Isn't it exciting? Before tonight, part of this is because of Women's History Month. And can you hear okay? I'm not going to really lean over like this. Oh, should I lean like that? I should lean like that? Okay, I'm coming over here. There. Okay, I have to lean too far. Okay, anyway, I started looking up some things about women and the environment and ecology, and there's a whole eco-feminist agenda out there that is just it's so exciting. I don't know, they all know about it, I'm sure you all do, but I didn't hear as much about it. So I want to read a quote just to start off by Vandana Shiva. And she is an activist and eco-feminist and has done so many wonderful things and is fighting for our earth and for our futures. She said, "We are either going to have a future where women lead the way to make peace with the earth, or we are not going to have a human future at all." And then Naomi Klein said, "Climate change isn't an quote-unquote issue to add to the list of things to worry about next to healthcare and taxes. It is a civilizational wake-up call, a powerful message spoken in the language of fires, floods, droughts, and extinctions, telling us that we need an entirely new economic model and a new way of sharing this planet. telling us we need to evolve. So that's Naomi Klein. And I could be quoting these three women just as easily for all that each of them has said, all that each of them has done. I'm so honored to be here with them. I think that what we're going to do is have each of them talk a little bit about what they've done. I'm going to give a quick little intro because I have the mic, you know? Don't give a politician a mic unless you don't want to talk. Anyway, so I think we'll start with Mary Piper to my left. Mary, whom I'm sure all of you know, but you may not know some of her history, went to UC Berkeley and got a degree in cultural anthropology. She then went on to the University of Nebraska to receive a doctorate in clinical psychology. Clinical psychology. She was a Rockefeller Scholar in Residence. She received 2 American Psychology Presidential Citations, but returned 1 due to the psychologist's support of the enhanced interrogations at Guantanamo. I mean, literally, every day she fights our fight, doesn't she? She's authored 12 books, including Reviving Ophelia, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for over 3 years, just to remind us, because that was a little bit ago. The Green Boat, A Life in Light, Meditations on Impermanence, and that's her newest book. So, my mom lived with us the last 10 years of her life, and I read Another Country, which really helps us to understand taking care of our elders and the issues that they go through, as well as the loss that I felt at times. So anyway, I am honored to introduce the brilliant, fabulous, amazing, compassionate Mary Piper. Thank you.
Well, I know Patty has a lot of good questions for us, and I also very much want to hear my co-panelists, so I'll be brief with just talking for a few minutes about my work. I also want to thank Brittany for organizing this. It's so much fun for me to be on the panel with these 3 women. It's really an honor to be in their presence. I think we may all have a little bit of humility issues going here tonight because it is a panel of such interesting women to all of us. I also would like all the people who've been part of Guardians of the Aquifer or Coalition to Stop the KXL to stand up, which I believe is both of you at one point. Wayne, and who else in this room has been part of it? Look at it. There's a lot of people. And I think over the years, there's probably been roughly 70 people who have come and gone over the years. And many of you know our first work was to stop the KFL pipeline. And we actually had amazing success with that. We had that success in part because we knew our state. We knew that this was a polite state, that we weren't going to get anywhere by marching and name calling and aggressive protesting, that we really wanted to do everything Nebraska nice, that we would be much more likely to be heard and respected. We also wanted to work with farmers and rural people, and amazingly, that's very hard to do sometimes in this polarized time, but amazingly, we had allies immediately, especially the ranchers out in the Sandhills, because they really understood at a core level that if their water was polluted, they couldn't feed their cattle bottled water, that their whole way of life would disappear. So the first time we had a tractor pull of farmers, or a tractor parade around the Capitol of farmers and ranchers protesting this. We were so happy. We thought we were like a bunch of urban liberals. And then all of a sudden we had people like Jane's friend, Brandon Thompson, and we had many other groups join us. So that was a wonderful experience. And I learned a lot about how the Nebraska government worked with that. If you want to change something, especially if it involves a powerful corporation from another country, and a lot of laws that have been written to protect powerful corporations from anywhere in the world, you learn a lot when you try to stop it, about how the legislature works. You learn about the backdoor meetings and the regulatory people appointed by the governor and so on and so on. But we played that pretty well. The biggest victory was probably when there was an advertise for KXL on the Jumbotron and the crab booth. And that's when we knew we're going to win this thing. And I think part of it was a lot of Nebraskans, they had grandparents who homesteaded. They're people who stayed there all their lives. They love this state. They understand this state. They like the sandhills. They like the cranes. And they don't really want our state's natural beauty destroyed. And we had a lot of clever tactics too. I mean, we had, one of my favorites was the apple pie brigade. And we would bake beautiful, Nancy Packard would bake a beautiful deep crust cheddar apple pie. And we would take it and award it to people we felt were doing a good job for the environment. And we had to take the governor a thank you in advance gift. And so we'd take him bran muffins and little wild bouquets and such. And the letters would always be, thank you in advance for calling a special session to deal with this problem of KXL. And we actually got a meeting with him at one point, at which point he did call a special session. When he called it, though, he didn't recommend any bill or changes. He basically called it and then told the legislature, it's your job to call it. And he wrote Obama, kind of pleading with Obama to do something, thinking Obama wouldn't do anything. But Obama said, yeah, I'll support you, do something about it. So it was kind of a funny hot potato. People kept passing it around thinking nobody would take charge. But finally somebody took charge. We had legislative hearings. We had brilliant people out there who'd worked hard on their testimony. And we had a great victory with that. Just a great victory. It was good for us. I wrote most of the Green Voters about that victory. And it was good for the fossil fuel, people fighting fossil fuel places all over the country, because it gave them a set of procedures and protocols and ideas for forming groups to fight these kind of problems all over the country. So that was a wonderful work we've done. We started out Coalition to Stop the KXL, and we became Guardians of the Aquifer. The next project we took on was the Costco chicken factory. I don't know, we did everything to stop that. I mean, literally the most ridiculous thing. I can't tell you how fast people drove by me and how sure they were to avert their eyes the other way. We didn't really get very far with that. We just didn't get very far. But we did get some things done, really good things with LES and OPPD. Ken Winston was real helpful with us in that. And we've managed to do some water protecting. Like, for example, Alt-N was doing some really pretty irresponsible things in terms of wanting to dump waters into rivers, flow into groundwater, flow into drinking water. And I think we raised just enough hell about that we got it stopped. You never know exactly what you got stopped, because you know what you don't get stopped. But a lot of the best work we can do in Nebraska with our political climate is to get things stopped. So we don't know what harm we prevented, but we're pretty sure we prevented harm. So that's what I say our main work would be. Right now, we're very interested in water in our state. There's less of it. It's full of nitrates, some uranium, lots of other toxic chemicals. We're worried we're going to become a state like Iowa, where they have to treat their water in these expensive places. And so we've got a lot of ideas about how to approach this water problem in our state. One of the things we're hoping for is educational forums and then discussions at churches and community centers around the state, and some major water festivals and activities, actions, where we can get people more engaged in directly learning about our water and then weighing in about our water to protect our state. So we've been going on now as a group 11 years. We have a lot of fun as a group. It's just a lovely group of people. We hug each other, we cook each other good food. We have a real sense for, we've got each other's backs. If we need to do something that's risky, we'll help each other do it. So I love this group. I'm very happy with this group. And I think I'll pass it to you because.
I'm going to introduce her.
Oh, sure.
I think, hold on, that's okay.
This first question is just talk about the word, right?
No, I'm introducing each person, letting everybody have a few minutes, so. Okay, thank you. Okay, next, my fabulous friend, can you hear? Okay, Kim Morrow, who is a California transplant, lucky us that she came and stayed. And she is currently the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Lincoln. I can't imagine a better spot for any of us to have her. So that's very important. She has worked to address climate change issues for over 15 years and across many sectors, from business to nonprofit, to post-secondary schools, to faith communities. And I think she was really one of the first to recognize the import of bringing in faith communities to the protection of our earth. So she's a wonderful person. She was awarded and honored with the Obama White House Champion of Change Award in 2015 due to her work with faith communities. So that's And from 2016 to 2019, Kim has been named one of Lincoln's 30 most influential women. So people are understanding the import of her work and what she's doing. And, and such a large part of it is due to climate change. So Kim, would you please talk a little bit? Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Well, gosh, I'm just so honored to be here tonight, and it's great to hear you tell those old stories again, Mary, because it reminds me that I arrived in Lincoln in 2010 from Berkeley, California, and I was a minister then, and I was just fresh from protesting all kinds of things in Berkeley and San Francisco with my stole on, so I didn't think anything of it. As I landed here, hear this whole big thing's going on about Keystone XL, and I'm like, I'm there. And little did I know that all the other ministers in town were like, what is she doing? But it was such an honor to learn from both of you back in those years. And everything Mary said, the victories and the tactics were just brilliant. And I was really tutored, I think, by both of you about how to make change in this state, in this culture, how to bring people together. You both are so good at that in your own ways. And my interest was always on more so on climate than other environmental issues. And so I was working at First Plymouth Church and kind of trying to pair, how do we work on climate from a community-based perspective, and what does that mean when you kind of make all those connections between food and farming and environmental justice, and then kind of concentric circles out from there to dealing with climate change. And basically my scope just grew. I wanted to do more and work on a larger scale. So I went to Nebraska Interfaith Power and Light, which is a statewide nonprofit working with faith communities. And then I was fortunate to work at the university for a year with Professor Don Wilhite, who's a climatologist, and he's also an inspiring leader in his own right, and he was really driven to create a statewide climate action plan, or should I say, to lay the groundwork for creating a statewide climate action plan. And so we worked on that with Senator Ken Haar a lot that year too. And then I went to a consulting company called Veritas Group and was there for 6 years and brought climate planning to their suite of services. And so I was able to do climate planning for universities and cities then for 3 different cities I worked on. And the probably one of the highlights of my career was getting to create Lincoln's climate action plan. And I was just remembering this one quote that I thought I would share. If you don't know who Rob Hopkins is, I highly recommend that you find his work, especially his book, From What Is to What If. It's a great book that just is filled with kind of inspirational stories about what we could become if we take climate and sustainability seriously. And so he wrote, one response to the need for rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented change in all aspects of society to deal with the impacts of climate change is to kick against that, deny it, and say that it's impossible. Another response is to look at it as a historic, one-off invitation to our brilliance. And that's really the way I like to think about climate change, and that's what's so fascinating about the work that I do now, is this is really an incredible opportunity to rethink our relationship with the natural world, with money, with energy, transportation, food, just everything down the line. And ultimately, if we can figure it out, we're going to be better off than we have been. And then finally, I'd just like to let you know that today is kind of a historic day when I think about it, because earlier today I had a meeting with the Nebraska Department of Energy and Environment, and there's some sort of late breaking news. Some of you are aware they are going to receive a $3 million grant from the EPA as part of the Climate Pollution Reduction Program to create a state climate action plan. So this is part of President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, and so I went over to talk with them and kind of give them some best practices and best tips about how they might go about doing that. So all that work that Don Wilhite and Ken Haar and Senator Panthine Brooks did, it's finally going to happen. So lots for us to celebrate.
Wow, that is really good news. I can't even believe it. We worked so hard, and people are just naysayers there. It's in that legislature. It's been, but this is different now. It's totally different from when I was there. But anyway, they, it was just people would look at you as I talk about it, and you could actually see the wall coming over their eyes, and they could not understand what I was talking about, or would not understand, and didn't believe in science, basically. It was truly one of the most frustrating things that I had to experience there. But anyway, what a blessing and relief that is. Good news. Thank you. Thank you for all your fabulous work, Kim, creating that for Lincoln. Finally, the fabulous Jane Klebb, who is, everyone knows her, I presume, because she's fearless and fierce and strong and doesn't suffer fools, but also has a heart full of gold. So in 2010, she founded Bold, Nebraska, which became a grassroots, as you all know, organization of farmers, ranchers, our first people to stop Keystone XL pipeline. And some people called her the Keystone Killer, among other things. That's probably the softest thing you were called. So, don't mess with a strong, proud, brilliant eco-feminist, okay? That's all I can tell you. Jane has been featured in New York Times Magazine, She has expanded Bold, Nebraska to create Bold Alliance, which is nationwide, and has expanded the efforts beyond the Keystone XL pipeline to include, as Mary discussed, protecting water rights, property rights, promoting clean energy and all that. I know she'll tell you more, but also she initiated the movement called Reject and Protect, where they put 12 teepees on the National Mall and raised the attention about what was going on. I mean, she's just incredible. And she also, of course, did the advocacy concert, Harvest the Hope, which included Willie Nelson and Neil Young. I think I'm telling you all things you know, but it's always good to be reminded about excellence in our midst. So anyway, thank you, Shane, for all of that. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. First, I hope that the state climate action plan actually uses the words climate change and that it is caused by fossil fuels. So we'll see. Well, there's hope. There is hope. It's great to be in the presence of greatness with my fellow panelists and Senator Pansing Brooks, who should be Congresswoman Pansing Brooks. And I know that if it was up to this beautiful blue dot, or the rainbow dot as we lovingly call it, she would be in Congress serving the people instead of Representative Flood, who makes videos about his gas stove, which is seamlessly nonsense. We have also a major election coming up where we have a mayor who has lifted up climate and who has increased clean energy. I think these stats are right, from 20% to about 40% in the city of Lincoln, and something that we have to keep going. So, I think with Bold, Nebraska, we were always very clear that we were an organization that was standing up to protect the land and water, and that we were trying to be a bridge between rural and urban, and the divides that so many times politicians and politics tells us that we have to stay in our corners and stay in our communities. And we also, from the very beginning, were very clear that politics was going to be part of everything we did. That we wanted to make sure that democracy and voting was just as important as us standing up for people's property rights. And I think that we accomplished that with Keystone XL and continue to accomplish that now with these fights against these risky carbon pipelines that are now threatening Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota. I think with climate, sometimes people in Washington, D.C. or in boardrooms think that we can outsmart climate change, that technology somehow is going to save us, when in the reality, the people in this room are going to save us. It's people living in rural communities who are beginning to stand up against fossil fuel interests to tell them, actually, no, windmills aren't going to cause cancer and aren't going to kill birds and aren't going to do all these other awful things that you're saying. It's going to be the rural communities that will really be the heroes and the saviors in that story in the end. But it's going to take a lot of work. The political divides are real, and the words climate change even make those divides even bigger. And I learned pretty quickly when we started the Keystone fight, when we were in churches and in bars and in boardrooms talking with farmers and ranchers and community folks, that the words climate change or the science of how climate change was going to impact us did not move people's hearts, and it did not change people's minds. What did was that they wanted to protect their legacy. They wanted to protect what they were passing down to their kids and their grandkids. They wanted to make sure that they weren't going to be victims of corporate greed. And I think Nebraskans' spirit of the little guy always standing up and pushing back against the big guy was on full display then, and is on full display even in the legislature right now, with some brave members of the legislature standing up for the least among our kids, the trans kids who are being victimized by so many people in the legislature. So I carry that spirit with me always. I know we have a bunch of questions to get to, but I did want to take a point of personal privilege. I'm sure my sister's watching. My sister's probably my biggest fan. I always say, when I told her that I was going to speak, I don't know, choked up, that I was going to speak on this panel with Mary Pfeiffer. She was like, well, does Mary know that you've read her book so many times when you were trying to recover? I had an eating disorder when I was younger. And I was like, I've told Mary that story. And she's like, oh, make sure you tell her again. And I was like, I will. And Mary really was part of a group of women who literally saved my life, so I could then fight all these battles. So it's an honor to be here, an honor to be with everybody here today.
That's beautiful. Okay, well, I think that what we want to do is we'll ask some questions first, but then we're going to open it up to all of you. And because we're live streaming, I will repeat your question, even though we can all probably hear it, okay? So I think that just to get our discussion going a little bit, I think it'd be interesting to find out from you all. Basically, can you talk a little bit about how you think, some of the things I read talk about how climate change and what's occurring with extreme heat and drought and all of that, how it really affects women and young girls in a way more than even men. So could any of you speak to that a little bit? Have you had experience with that? This is, again, harkening back to Women's History Month and how we're tying this all together. Do you want to go first? Good.
Sure. Well, what you may be partly referring to some findings from a really interesting study a few years ago called Project Drawdown, which many of you are probably familiar with. This was a team of researchers who did some in-depth analysis to find out what would be the most impactful strategies globally that we could undertake to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I think it surprised a lot of people that the number, I think it was like number 2, 3, and 5, or something like that, had to do with educating women and girls. So it has a massive global impact because when those women and girls are better educated, they have fewer children, they have better outcomes, they're able to escape that cycle of poverty, and I was just stunned at what a difference it made. In terms of more locally, I think it's just really important to always be aware of, kind of as Jane just said, the least among us, the people who have health vulnerabilities, social vulnerabilities, are going to be most at risk when we have extreme heat events or extreme climate events of any type. And so, some of the things I'm particularly worried about are extreme heat, as you mentioned, what that might mean for pregnant women, for example, women and girls with respiratory issues. What flooding is going to be a big deal for us in Lincoln. We came very close to having a big disaster in 2015. If you were here then, you remember that extreme rainfall event, and the levels of Salt Creek got perilously high. And there's have since been some studies and projections done, and the long and the short of it is those levees are not high enough. And so we are going to be facing flooding, and so we need to pay particular attention to the people who live in the floodplains, and particularly the women and girls who are low income and rent in those areas and are going to have a harder time recovering from flood impacts.
Thank you. Yeah, some of the information. Do you have anything else to add? Or anything? Some of the information that I saw talked about the fact that women are particularly vulnerable in their jobs and in being able to find appropriate employment in emergency disasters, and of course that violence against women goes up at that point, and also abuse. And so we really have to come together. We talk about Mother Earth, and the women must rise up, because we're the ones that are truly gonna, now it's not fair because there's so many fabulous men here, but not as many as the women here too. But I do think that women have to take a stronger, more vocal and adamant role to protect our earth from here on. So anyway, that's just a thought. Mary, did you have something?
Well, I think,
Can you use your mic?
to me, I heard this question as what motivated me to get involved. And I thought about that quite a bit. I mean, growing up as a kid, I was outside all the time in Nebraska. And I loved birds, I loved rivers, I had relationships with trees. I rescued little animals that washed out into gutters after rainstorms. And I just developed a deep love for the land. And as I've gotten older, I've developed just a deep love for the preservation of the land. I mean, I think that many women see themselves as protectors and as caretakers and as sort of guardians of the future. They want their children to do well. They want their grandchildren to do well. And for me, I think loving the people I know, loving animals, loving clean water, loving our state has been very motivating for me. I've had other feelings, of course, about all this. I've been frustrated, I've been angry, but I've had despair. But for me, a big thing about being an activist is I see being an activist as the best possible mental health treatment for despair, anger, worry, etc. And when I started doing this work, what I noticed was just an immediate uplift to my mental health. And I wrote in The Green Boat, action is an antidote to despair. So for me, it's been very rewarding to be in the work because I can be busy and I can be useful. I think women, like men too, I don't want to make these either or very, strictly divided character traits. But I think women in general take a great deal of joy in being useful to other people. And this is a place where our work translates into being useful to a lot of people. I was struck by the fact that when I started thinking of environmental leaders, I thought about Rachel Carson, I thought about Jane Goodall, I thought about Winona LaDuke, with Wangari Maathai, Arundhati Roy, who led the water campaigns in India, and also I've thought about these Swiss women that were just in the courts yesterday. This group of women, it's called the Swiss Senior Women for Climate Protection, and they have filed an appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. And what they're saying is the Europeans' actions on climate change are insufficient to protect the planet, and that is a violation of their basic human rights for clean water, clean air, healthy land, biodiversity, and also their basic human rights to believe in a future for their grandchildren. So I'm very excited about that group. Another thing about women being involved in environmental work is, in general, women aren't threatening, especially grandmas aren't threatening. I mean, grandmas are almost like babies. People think we're cute, we're harmless, or they have a nice memory of their grandma. They have a good feeling about the word grandma. So we're pretty effective when it comes to being able to do things without being immediately stereotyped as a difficult person. And one of the tactics we had the Apple Pie Brigade, but we also for a while tried to have a movement called the Rocking Chair Brigade, where we'd have all these grandmas go down and sit in front of the Capitol when there were protests and be rocking our rocking chairs for planet Earth. We thought it would be just such a good visual, So I'm excited about these women and what they're doing. And I'm also, I believe, convinced that that there may be something special about women and their strong desire to save the earth for their children and their grandchildren. So,
Thank you. Thank you. So Kim, she did go on to my next question, which was what motivated you to become involved? So please, can you address that?
I used to be embarrassed to kind of tell my story this way, but I'm owning it now. So I'm from LA, and I did not have this like beautiful experience of nature that Mary had growing up. I grew up in the smog of the San Gabriel Mountains in the 70s. But it was actually a really educational experience because by the time I got to be a teenager, I was looking around going, what is going on here? This is no way to live. And it really got me thinking about the environment, about human community, and what a good society would be. So from there, I ended up in the Bay Area and just learned a lot, sort of by osmosis. It was really when I saw An Inconvenient Truth in 2007, Al Gore's film. That was my sort of conversion moment when I really understood the breadth of and the depth of the climate crisis. And it just kind of hit me like a bolt of lightning that I had to work on this. This had to become my life's work. I imagine some of you have felt that way too. So yeah, and I guess I would agree with Mary that I do think women seem to be natural connectors, and networking is easy for women, and I think seeing the interconnections between humans and nature and between present and the future and between people and families and on and on. And I've seen that come as a real asset in how work gets done as well, because though I love men, men tend to have a tendency to have turf wars, I've noticed, in professional circles, and that ends up hindering the work oftentimes. And women don't tend to have territorial battles like that. They naturally reach out, ask for help. They've even said, that the women leaders of countries did better surviving the pandemic. And they theorize that that's why, because women leaders don't have trouble asking for help. They don't see it as a weakness to ask for help or to reach out and connect with others. And that's been my experience too.
Thank you. Yes, Jane.
I wasn't an accidental activist, but I was certainly an accidental environmentalist. So environment and climate were not ever the kind of first issues that I was an advocate for. I did a lot on the youth vote, and healthcare and mental health care were the three big that I was working on. And then we created Bold Nebraska, which really was supposed to be an extension of the work we had done the previous 2 years with the union SEIU on making sure everybody knew the benefits of Obamacare, right? Because we spent 2 years and encouraging Senator Nelson to vote for Obamacare, and I thought the next several years we're going to be working in rural and urban communities, making sure folks knew all the benefits, how to sign up, all that kind of good stuff, and get the healthcare and mental health care they needed. It was really because Dwayne, with the Nebraska Wildlife Federation, had called me and asked me if I had heard about the Keystone XL pipeline, and I told him I had not. And he told me a little bit about it, and his national folks called me, and they knew my husband was a cattle rancher, so they thought, I might know some farmers and ranchers. And after I talked with Dwayne and the national NWF, I started getting calls from farmers and ranchers, from folks in the Sandhills that knew my husband and my husband's family, saying, that literally one of the ranchers was like, well, Obama, can't you just call him and tell him to say no? And I was like, well, I don't really know Obama just because I'm a Democrat. I got involved because I felt like there was a purpose to protect people's land and water, and that there was already a misconception about farmers and ranchers. When I would get on calls with the national environmental groups, they thought that it was going to be the Omaha and Lincoln folks putting pressure on Nelson to kind of stand up and be a hero in the story. And I kept on reminding them that, the farmers and ranchers that you have in your head, that from your perspective, many of the national environmentalists, that, they're destroying the land and water, they're the best environmentalists that you can get. The family farmers and ranchers, the corporate is another story. Costco, don't buy Costco chicken. They're a different story. But the farmers and ranchers, they take such good care of the land and water because it is their entire economic livelihood. It is everything that their parents, their grandparents, and their great-grandparents worked for, so they could then have something to pass on to their kids and grandkids. And so I really took a different perspective on fighting the pipeline, I think, than was probably traditionally going to be the playbook. And I think that was obviously part of the success of everybody's work. We all did. We all took a different playbook of what would have been a traditional environmental fight. So that's how I got involved in the environment, I'm sure to the dismay of Republicans and fossil fuel corporations. Because I'm still here.
Okay, I'm stealing this because I've been told people can't hear me, which is very shocking in my world. So, and they can pass the microphone. That's okay. So I want to ask one more question and then try to take it to the audience and let you all participate however you would like. What I would like you to answer, and I think we'll start with Kim this time, just so it isn't always in the same order. I'm hoping you would talk about your victories and maybe the stumbles along the way to those victories, and because you have each had significant victories, and I think people would be interested. And also, as you're talking about it, maybe how being a woman has affected that victory, or has it? Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. So I'd just like you to talk about that whole area. Kim?
Sure. I think some of the most challenging times I had was in the years after I got divorced, and I was a single mom, and I had only had one part-time job when I got divorced, and I was determined to keep working on climate issues. But in Lincoln, Nebraska in 2012, there are no full-time jobs working on climate. So I was stringing together 3 part-time jobs, and they were all, grant dependent, didn't have secure funding, and it was just extremely stressful to keep all that going and to maintain a sense of self-worth in the midst of it too, because you're just not really seen as that important when you're just a part-time staffer and all that stuff. And it was scary too, because I was really facing those funding sources running out, and I didn't know what I would do. I've also had, not very often, but a couple times over the years, not once or twice, I've had a boss who was really misogynistic and, didn't accord women the opportunities they deserved, and that was really hard. So if you find yourself in that position, I recommend getting out of it as soon as you can. So given those challenges, I just had this kind of one-pointed focus on working on climate. I just didn't want to give it up, and I was so driven by the magnitude of the crisis, but I was also so fascinated by these problems and their implications and the opportunities in the midst of it, that I just didn't want to give up. And so in retrospect, I can see now that because I was divorced and I was in a tough situation, it forced me to be bolder and to ask for things I wouldn't have asked for before, to fight harder, to, just to push harder. And it ultimately actually helped my career, I think, because life would have been too easy if I hadn't been pushed that way. But anyway, so because of all of that continued perseverance, I guess you'd say, I was in the position to eventually create Lincoln's Climate Action Plan. So I just wanted to bring this is my victory. This is actually, it's online. these are the only ones that are printed because, you know, we don't want to use paper. But this big thick one is basically a book. Dwayne asked me if I'd written a book yet. This is the book that I wrote. This is the thinner one is the one that actually got approved by City Council. But anyway, thank you. Yeah, they're online with the City of Lincoln. So yeah, that's what I.
It's easy to say Keystone XL, but there are so many sub kind of victories in that, and so I just wanted to describe one, and that would be the Cowboy and Indian Alliance. And we didn't come up with that term. That was something that old timers in South Dakota, when they were fighting the uranium mining there in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Farmers, ranchers, and tribes in South Dakota came together and they called themselves the Cowboy and Indian Alliance. So we got invited by Faith Spotted Eagle to come up to a meeting. This was very early on in the fight. I had never done any Indigenous organizing before this meeting. So Faith called and said, can you bring some of your ranchers up to a meeting? We want to talk about potentially doing a Mother Earth Accord and some other organizing together, and we'd like you to do a presentation about the Ogallala Aquifer. So I was like, great, yes. And then it hit me that we would be going into a room with all Indigenous folks, and I was bringing Sandhills ranchers who were ranching the very land that Indigenous families obviously had lived on first and had been then removed from. And so that was very heavy and not lost on me, and certainly not lost on the ranchers. And so when we huddled about what we were going to do, I said, of course, I'll create the PowerPoint presentation that we'll give about the Ogallala Aquifer and how critical it is and how the Sandhills interacts with the Ogallala Aquifer and what this tar sands pipeline would do. I said, but I really think it's important that we just tell our stories, because we know each other, but other folks in the room won't know us, and you should speak from your heart about why you're working to stop the pipeline. I did not tell them and say sorry for what your previous ancestors have done to Indigenous families. So there was a leader of the tribal nation who, his name is Orville Looking Horse, who is very well respected among all the tribes. And he was sitting right in the front with his arms crossed and his head down, occasionally looking up with what felt like, through my soul, stern eyes. And I was like, oh God, this is not going well. And I'm going through my PowerPoint presentation, and then I gave the mic to the farmers and ranchers. And they, I think just because they're so always in touch with what needs to be said, they start just pouring their heart out. And, these are tall, manly men, right? And they have tears in their eyes talking about how they know that their families did take the land of everybody's ancestors that were in the room, and that when they were kids, they would find arrowheads and see other artifacts, and that they now understand deeply, personally, that their land is now being threatened to be taken away, what that must feel like for everybody in the room. And I'm, as they're speaking and really speaking from their hearts, I'm looking at Orville Looking Horse, and he still has his arm crossed and his head kind of looking down. And when the final farmer spoke, Orville Looking Horse kind of stands up and just broadens his arms really wide and says, "Welcome to the tribe." And just went on to speak about how we are now, from this point forward, we are connected and responsible for each other. And that if we're gonna win this fight, it's gonna be because our ancestors are calling us to be this together. And so from that point forward, it was never just the farmers and the ranchers or just Nebraskans. We really worked hard to make sure that everybody had a place in the fight. Grandmothers, farmers, ranchers, environmentalists, young people, the Cowboy and Indian Alliance. It took us all. And so that was by far, I think, one of the biggest victories, I think, of the fight. of difficulties, I mean, there are many, right? Like I messed up many, many times doing Indigenous organizing because I didn't know all the cultural norms and there were lots of learning that I had to do. And if you've worked with me, you know that I am a bull in a china shop sometimes. And when I have an idea, I want to get it done. And a lot of the elders in the fight would often come to me and say, we know you want to get to, Z really, really fast, but it's going to take more time for us to get with you. So we need you to slow down. And so there were lots of lessons for me during the fight. And then as a woman, women leaders are just treated differently. And anybody who says otherwise is a liar. They belittle you. They talk about your fashion. They talk about your weight. They make just stupid memes about facial expressions you make, etc. And then there's the more threatening things. During Keystone, many of us got many death threats. It wasn't just an occasional death threat. And I got death threats on my kids because I think as they knew that as a woman, I was deeply protective of my children. So those are all risks that women leaders take. And, those of us that are in the public eye take. And I think we get it way more than male leaders do.
Thank you, Jane.
That reminds me of a funny letter I got. I got this long, angry member from a man telling me that I was a terrible person and trying to ruin our state. And he was really angry at me, and I made our state look bad and so on. And it was because I didn't know what I was talking about, and so many accusations. And I was kind of reading it and feeling bad. But then when he got to the end of the letter, he signed it. He didn't sign his name, of course, which a person wouldn't who wrote that letter. He signed it, everyone who lives on the planet. Okay, I don't believe it. I mean, everyone who lives on the planet. But it was kind of funny at that time, Well, one thing I want to say about my victories is none of them were my victories alone. And I'm a big believer in groups. I believe that groups have a sort of a capacity to act, to support each other, to create beautiful ideas, to persist, that individuals, and to have an impact, a serious impact that individuals cannot have. And I've always been really lucky since we started this group. We started the Guardians of the Aquifer in 2010. And so it's now been going on 22 years. We've always had a group of really supportive people. And we did, of course, great when we were winning, but we did a good job when we were losing too, because we had each other and we were having regular dinners with wine and victory reports of what things we could do. We really got pretty good at figuring out, here's what we can do, let's pay attention to it and work on it. Here's what we can't do, let's not even mess with it. It's a waste of time. We had a lot of celebrations of victories. We also, this year, we didn't do particularly well with Costco, but I think our group may have played a pretty significant role in getting Alden shut down and in getting some of the specific decisions made about Alden stopped. For example, at one point they were going to dump the contaminated water into rivers and streams. And I think we got that stopped by some group action. So sometimes what we did was stop things that never happened. And that's a very worthy goal. We stopped some legislation this year, LD 662, that basically handed over the land of Nebraska to the worst corporate people who would have rights over farmers, communities, school districts, everything else. And we stopped that before it got to the floor. So we've had some really good victories that way. We've had some really good clean energy victories. And yeah, I just feel proud of the idea that all kinds of people have been in and out of our group, sometimes for years, sometimes for 6 months at a time or a year at a time. But we've just managed to have a great deal of fun, all kinds of impacts. We sent a couple of our younger people to the Paris Climate Conference. And they weren't inside with the big leaders, but they were outside with all the other people that had come there to protest. And we had a meeting at a bar downtown where they live broadcast from the streets of Paris. They talked to Amy Goodman and all kinds of people. And we're all in this bar listening to our Paris representatives of the Guardians of the Outdoor giving us a report. So we've tried to make things fun. We've tried to come up with ways to have a bigger influence than we could have if we just stayed home. But most of our work's done as a local group. And I guess what I would feel happiest about is being a part of a group that's managed to really love each other and work effectively for 13 years.
Thank you. Okay, well, we'll take some questions. Are we all inspired? And literally, I love the part about it. It's all of us together. It's not one person. And Bruce Johnson's here, and he was with the Elders of the Earth and came and really taught me about what to do and how to and Ken Winston, Don Wilhite, just to come in and help me, besides these three women, on how to move forward, how to best draft the legislation. We went back and forth about whether or not we should use climate change or whether we should use extreme weather preparedness, because literally we had people that did not believe in climate change, but we needed to move that bill forward. So, you know, it's a battle, but it takes everybody. So any single thing that you can do will add to the whole effort. And so don't feel like you can't do anything. Know that you can, and every bit. You don't know if your act is what tips the balance towards the enduring good and the protection of the earth. So let's go with questions. You'll ask them, I'll repeat them for the people online. Yes.
I have a big voice, so I don't need a microphone. I wanted to piggyback on a couple of things that Mary Piper said with regard to the Costco chicken barns. There are several people here that organized, we have a larger group, but some of them are represented here, to fight that. And it is true that we didn't do as much as we wanted to do. However, in Lancaster County, we did.
Yeah, that's right.
And I want to recognize Ken Winston and Penny Greer and John Leo and Mal Baker, and there's others probably. But what we did in Lancaster County is that we were able to get restrictive regulations against CAFOs. CAFOs are confined animal feeding operations. So the chicken barns, dairy, cattle, hog confinement operations. And since we were able to do that, not a single CAFO has located in Lancaster County. To Mary's point, a little bit later, organizing just regular citizens into groups and going forward with an idea, it works. So,
It does.
thank you.
Okay, so what was said, for those of you at home, I will try to summarize, that while not as much was done on the Costco initiative as hoped, there were great things done here in Lincoln. And so, Mary, or do you want to respond to that and maybe summarize what, because I'm not sure everybody at home heard it, so can you just,
Well, or Jane could.
or
come
Jane
back
could,
and-
yeah, Jane, yeah. Does anybody have anything to add?
I mean, Jane can come down.
Okay, can you guys pass the microphone around? That would be the best thing. Thank you, because it's hard to.
Thank you, Jane.
Sorry, Jane. Okay, where do you want me to
Introduce
go?
yourself, tell them who you
Yeah.
are. Most of us know you.
We do.
Well, my name is Jane Egan, and I'm a political and environmental activist here. I chaired the Lancaster Hills Alliance Group that, again, is a citizen activist group that fought against the chicken barns. We did have a contractor apply for a special permit to build barns in southwest Lancaster County. We fought that tooth and nail right up to the Supreme Court. We did lose that first battle, but the second contractor that applied in North Lancaster County, their permit was denied. And it was because we were so forceful in our opposition to this kind of an operation in our county. So again, groups of just everyday citizens, neighbors, friends, associates, colleagues, getting together and forcing the policy makers to make good policy. So that's what it was.
Thank you.
I could also just say that Commissioners Flowerday, Yoakum, and Vest really did listen to the citizens, and it's a, I think a call to action to anybody who's thinking about, oh, well, I want to run for legislature or Congress because I can make change. Run for county commission. That's where all the zoning of good stuff and bad stuff happens when it comes to CAPOs, clean energy, bad energy. And so the citizens really pushed the county commissioners to do the right thing, and they followed up with good policy.
Another question? Anybody have a question? Yes.
So this is for anybody.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
You are all aware, as Kim said, of the magnitude of the crisis. So my question is, what gives you hope that we're going to pull this off before it gets really bad?
Great question. Who'd like to take that first?
I could say.
Oh, wait, okay. Are you gonna, okay, here.
You got it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay, I got my running boots on.
Maybe I'll just go up by whoever it is.
Well, of course, for me, hope derives from action. I don't think I'd have any hope at all if I weren't acting and knowing people who were acting. That's what gives me hope in general. But I also think that there's some really good tactics emerging. And for example, the lawsuit by the Swiss women gives me hope. The lawsuits in every state by children saying the way we're behaving now is denying our generation a future. Also, I think that, for example, the water in Nebraska has gotten so bad that there's almost going to have to be a tipping point here in terms of attitudes. And we've got to do something about water, even though, our governor's a guy who is a polluter in terms of his big pig capitals. So I think there's a lot of different ways. We're learning better tactics. Boycotts work, I think. Investments work in terms of the cleaner investments. And education works. Education works. The other thing is, I think we're getting a lot better sense for how to make connections with other people that share our interests. So example, there's a lot more, I don't like the word intersectionality. It sounds too academic in a way. But women are making connections, men are making connections with poverty, indigenous rights groups, human rights groups, people who are really interested in local control of food and energy, and other groups around the world that are doing the same kind of work. And there's all these hopeful things like, have any of you been to the Earth ships down at Taos? This is a real interesting phenomenon where a wealthy guy from the Bay Area moved out to Taos. He designed these sustainable houses that are built into caves. Some of them are very expensive houses. They're by no means, some of them are very fanciful with castles and turrets and things like that. But essentially, they use solar energy. They have rain barrels. They save a lot of their water. They are built with recycled materials like tires, pop bottles, cans, and they have real cool designs. They're very well insulated and designed for heat and climate control. They have their own water systems to rewash water, and they have septic stuff. Then they're so efficient in terms of
We need you to
they're so efficient in terms of how they're running these earth ships, that at the bottom layer of the earth ships, they have fishing pools with tilapia. So you can go down and fish after dinner or before dinner and catch your fish. And the sign on the exhibit of these earth houses says, if we put down all our weapons, we could build every person on the planet work earth ship, where they can have everything they need to be self-sustainable. Everyone could have a house, food, and we wouldn't have war because we would have converted all those weapons. So every now and then, these great ideas come along, great people come along, great groups come along. And I think now, especially younger people are going to be very engaged because their lives depend on it and they know it. So I'm hopeful.
I think, well, actually, Mary gave me a wonderful gift a few years ago. She took me out to San Francisco with a couple other people and took me to a weekend retreat of the Buddhist eco-philosopher Joanna Macy. And I recommend her work if you're not familiar. And it was really neat to do a weekend workshop with her. And she has developed a methodology, I guess you'd call it, of leading people through a 4-step process of encountering their grief for the environment and then moving through it to a stage where do you remember the names of the 4 stages? It's
First one is gratitude. The second one is acknowledging our despair. The third one is seeing with new eyes, which is new paradigms, looking at new ways of solving problems. And then the fourth one is going forth to go out and change things.
So she took us through these different exercises over the weekend where we encountered these, and some of it was very intense emotionally, to really kind of sit with your grief and feelings of loss and all of that. But it was really transformational for me and a lot of other people too. And I think that it helped me realize that I'm not gonna solve this. None of us are gonna solve this. But we do have our own unique work to do. Each of us has our own unique work to do that's as unique as our footprint and our fingerprint. And that matters. And what also matters is contributing to our descendants, to a kind of through line of the people who come after us, who will be able to live maybe in an earth ship like Mary described, but who will be able to live in peace with water and food, etc. I don't think that's what the entire world is going to be like just like right now on our planet. We have so many different kinds of people and different kinds of efforts, and there's all kinds of strife. I think that combination will continue to be there, but there will be people like us, 1,000 years from now, and our job is to contribute to that through line. So that really helped me, and I hope that her work might help you too.
I guess on the one hand, I have a lot of hope that the Keystone XL pipeline fight was so interconnected with other pipeline fights across the country that you saw Keystone XL fall, you saw Jordan Cove fall, you saw the Atlantic Coast pipeline fall. I think we're going to see Line 5 fall in Michigan. They're close to kind of finalizing that battle. Unfortunately, Line 3 was built, but that will be the last tar sands pipeline ever built in the United States. There's no question about that because of the economics and work that everybody has done. And so it gives me a lot of hope that citizens saw that they had the power to take on the fossil fuel industry and win. And now my hope is really beginning to shift on the build out of clean energy. In rural communities, there is real opposition to clean energy. And I think that the wind and solar industry, as well as environmentalists and climate advocates and politicians in DC, all believed once solar and wind were economically comparable and competitive with coal, oil, and gas, that wind and solar would just be magically built all over the place. The issue is in rural communities, climate groups, climate discussions are nowhere to be found. And what has placed and what has filled that void is tons of misinformation and fake grassroots groups funded by the fossil fuel industry that's really feeding on people's fears about what's next for their rural communities and how will their rural communities survive as young people are leaving and economics are changing. And so I've really begun to think a lot with some other folks too in a group collective on how can we change this paradigm? How can we break through this very clear opposition that has been happening for the past 10 to 15 years? And I think that there's some creative thoughts that are coming out of these discussions. You know, one is creating a renewable energy dividend, very similar to what happened in Alaska, and how citizens get profits from the pipelines there. And right now, it's only the counties and the landowners that get profits from wind and solar. And, you know, if you're in a community with 200 wind turbines, that changes things. It changes the landscape, it changes traffic, it changes all of those things. And so citizens, as environmental activists and climate advocates, we should want that economic and clean energy industry to benefit all people and not make the same mistakes that the fossil fuel industry made. So I think that's where my hope is right now, is that we're going to be able to break through this opposition with really creative new thinking about how we actually can build out clean energy that can benefit those of us who live in urban communities as well, with everybody at the table this time and not leaving people behind.
Any other questions? I'm going to come to you because I think that's the best way now.
She's the boss.
Okay. There we go.
Well, this isn't a question, but I do want to make everybody aware that there's a bill in our legislature now. It's LB 343, and that's you cannot get a state contract with Nebraska if you boycott Israel, and you have to sign in writing that you will not boycott Israel during that contract period. Since those have been passed now in 34 states, it's come to our Nebraska legislature. But as it has evolved since 2016, when they started passing that template that said Israel, it has evolved now to where you have to sign and certify that you will not boycott to get a state contract. You will not boycott arms dealers. You will not boycott fossil fuel companies. You cannot boycott timber, agriculture, or mining industries. So it's a First Amendment right to boycott, and that is being signed away by politicians who think they know better for us than our public consensus.
Okay, Jane, do you want to go first on that?
I'll just say, you know, the party of freedom loves to take away the freedoms of citizens. And you know, that's true for the right to protest. It's true for the right to reproductive freedom, the right to parent our children, the right to read books that might open our minds to different ideas and different cultures. And so I think it's really important that as citizens and as Nebraskans, we continue to really speak out about this. It's not all Republicans. It is the extreme wing and how radicalized some of the extreme wing has become that then other Republican politicians have to pretend that they're in that same camp, even though quietly they'll tell you otherwise. So I think, you know, not only obviously speaking out against this bill, but constantly reminding our Republican friends and family that we can do better by voting better. And crossing some party lines until I think the Republican Party finds their footing again.
Yeah, and reminding any moderate Republicans that we need them in the legislature and other places, because that's how we were able to stop a lot of that. We had enough votes last year to be able to stop all of these horrible things. And so really, if you know somebody who's a Republican, I used to be one, but which I now admit happily. At the same time, I was co-chair of the Lancaster County Republican Party. I was on Planned Parenthood's board. Think that had happened today? No. So we have to find people across the board that can work together. And whose bill was that? Do you remember whose? Oh, Slaughter.
Is it prioritized? Islam prioritized.
No, I did not. Okay.
Send your letters to the speaker. Committee hearings are over. Send those letters straight to the speaker.
Yeah, exactly. And a handwritten letter gets on the desk better, just FYI, than the thousands of emails that the senators don't have time to read. But if you get a handwritten letter, you do sort of open it and peek at it. So
Senator Arch.
Senator Arch, yes. Speaker Arch, yeah. Okay. Another question, yes.
Each of you have mentioned how you've learned how to deal with your issues, and that's such valuable knowledge. And it's kind of like reinventing the wheel if another group in Nebraska wants to start over. And so every time you would speak about that, I would think that is so interesting how you overcame these really huge obstacles in Nebraska. Our divisions are so set almost in stone. So I don't know whether it's an essay or a pamphlet or a book, but is there any way that the three of you or the one of you would consider some way of being able to share that information, especially when you're talking about dealing with rural and urban and with the legislature, how to approach, what you were saying about it's not, it's the legacy that actually brought together the ranchers and the farmers, and then the cowboys and the Indians, the very same thing. It was something I wouldn't think of because my focus is on what the heck is happening and are we ever going to stop it? And so it makes a lot of sense to me to focus it on a different way. I wouldn't have come up with that solution and I wouldn't have made progress.
Well, we didn't really come up with that. We didn't really come up with that solution originally. I remember when you went out to talk to some group that historically been really hostile to you in Western Nebraska? The place was packed. And it wasn't because they decided to get along with big city liberals. It was beside they needed help. They had the same issues we had. So that business of common issues is really important. I wrote a book called The Green Boat about our fight, which has a lot of one of the things we figured out in terms of tactics is we wanted to figure out all kinds of ways to get attention to our cause without alienating people and to get the most people involved in our cause as possible. And so, for example, we did things like Jane had worked on this with us. We had a water festival across the state, and we had everybody we knew in every small town in the state put on a water festival. And then Bold, Nebraska had the calendar of this water festival, and it looked like the whole state was exploding with water festivals valuing our water. Well, it actually wasn't that many, but I think the governor saw it, I think legislators saw it, and they thought, whoa, there's people out there that are having water festivals that want to protect the aquifer. So we tried to come up with a lot of tactics. You had the pumpkins against the pipeline. We just kept coming up with tactics people could enjoy, tactics where people could get together and talk to each other and support each other and become friends. And I mean, I remember one of the most moving things for me was when we had events in Lincoln about the pipeline, and this Ogoni people that had been run out of, I believe it was Nigeria. All their people had been killed by a pipeline, by the Royal Dutch Shell Company. And as that waste from the pipeline came down the river, people died, fish died, and the Agoni came to our event, and they wanted to talk, and they wanted to warn Nebraskans about what happened in Africa. And they said, one man said so sincerely, said, when the pipeline came, he said, first the fish died, then the plants died, then the animals died, then the people died. So don't let this happen in your state. So that was one of the beautiful things, is we found people, all kinds of people, that you wouldn't necessarily think, well, a group of refugees from Nigeria are gonna really have a big impact in this. But we kept figuring out creative ways, and we had a lot of jokes that the boardroom up in Trans Canada, with all this money and all these smart lawyers, are down here in Nebraska, are looking at us in Nebraska, what the heck are they doing? How are they as smarting us time after time? So it's intelligence, it's fun, it's working with every available person, and it's persistence. We stayed with it a long time. So.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, so. You're the guy, Jim. Sorry.
Maybe this will end on sort of a positive note.
Good.
And I'm guessing Jane is the person that may know the answer to this question. So I just had occasion to drive across Iowa and then drive back across Iowa. And there are a whole lot of, I can put it really close, there you go. I have a big voice too. And there are wind turbines all over the state of Iowa. And they're plunked right in the middle of cornfields in the state of Iowa. So somehow something is happening in rural areas in Iowa that wind turbines are being accepted. And I just wonder if you had any, I mean, Mary and I were just talking as we're watching all this stuff go by, and you know, there was a farmer somewhere that went and talked to farmers someplace else and said, this is working for me, you guys ought to look at it.
Yeah.
Do you know about this stuff? Can you talk about it?
Yeah. So there's a couple things, and there's obviously people in the room here too that conversation. There's a couple reasons why Nebraska is so far behind Iowa and Minnesota. One is because we're public power, and our elected officials didn't have the backbone or political will to go to Congress and say, you need to put in essentially a sentence into these tax subsidies for companies that when they build wind, they get this money because if public power was building them, they're public power, and so they wouldn't have, been able to get the tax incentives. And so they could have done a fix for that, but they chose not to because, they support oil, gas, and coal. So that was one economic barrier that our state had. The other issue is that in a lot of our rural communities, because of the misinformation that is just run rampant, rural communities are just zoning wind out. So Buffalo County just did a 3-mile setback, which means no wind will be developed. That just happened last week. Jefferson County did a mile just this past week too. Not as bad as the 3-mile setback, but still pretty constraining.
So what's happening right in Iowa?
What's happening right in Iowa, I think, is a couple of things. One, Iowa acted first. They were first out of the gate. And so even in Iowa, you're now beginning to see rural communities who are doing bigger setbacks. And so it's like a real problem that the climate community is just not paying attention to. I've just recently been writing a lot about this. You'll see me be talking more and more about this. So Iowa 1 was just out of the gate first, but the opposition is catching up to them now. And so if you talk to county commissioners, they'll say all the decommissioning plans and all these other things that they have to consider are major issues. Iowa would have more wind now if transmission lines were being built, but folks in Iowa stopped a lot of the transmission lines, just like folks in the Sandhills stopped the R line from being built. And so it is a political divide, it's a cultural divide, it is a kind of misinformation being fed by the fossil fuel industry, and if we're really honest as climate advocates, it's also because rural communities feel like they're being taken advantage of. And in a lot of times they are. They're essentially being asked by wind and solar companies who have no roots in their communities to shoulder the responsibility of putting wind and solar on their land and in their communities. And the vast, if not all, of that energy is exported out. There's no deal of let's keep 20% in the community, let's have 20% lower your electric bill. There's nothing about putting money in people's pockets rather than just in the county or just for the landowners that have the turbine. So we really have to rethink how we're doing this, or we're not going to solve climate change. So the IRA was great. It had lots of good things in it, lots of good resources for soil and all these other great things. It had a ton of money to build up clean energy, but that money literally will be sitting there because rural communities are like, no. So, but that you could say is crap, now what are we going to do? What we're going to do is do the same things we've done on pipeline fights, on the Costco chicken, on mead, on creating a climate action plan, Lincoln being a leader in our state. We're just going to act. We're going to do the same strategies that we did on Keystone, bringing creativity, constant actions, developing unlikely alliances, and really making sure that the projects are going to benefit the community. So I have a ton of hope. And I just think we have to constantly be pushing back on the opposition. They expect that we get tired and that we'll back down. And I think that's when we ramp back up.
Either of you like to add anything to that? No? You know, I do agree that the collaboration is truly what we need, and that we have to all come together and collaborate and make sure that our voices are heard. And literally, we have to follow these 3 leaders who taught us well. And have shown us examples through their work, their efforts, their vision, their passion. We are so blessed by these 3 women in our community and in our state and in our world and on our planet. So thank you for being I think, Barb, you have something I hate to but I did say last question, but.
Okay, well, let me just say, one thing is that they did emphasize education. And there is a bill, Patty knows I'm hot on this, 753, that we need to oppose. And, you know.
She's talking about LB 753, which is an education bill.
And if large donors give money to schools, they get a total write-off for their taxes.
We fought that tooth and nail last year, and it's going to go through this year. And they're going to get a tax credit, not even a percentage. This is a dollar for dollar credit for money given that comes out of our state coffers.
I listen to these guys and they're saying, get some alliance. I mean, the NSCA is trying to work on some things, but it is very close. And line and I guess is saying, this is the year I'm going to pass it. But it is, all this money from outstate Nebraska coming in, $750,000 or how much, I don't know. And you just have to write. And I just feel like if all these people are in silo schools learning all this crud, it's going to hurt us all.
Okay, stand up, speak out, be a voice, okay? We've got work to do. Thank you all for coming tonight.